Sophie Miller never believed in love at first sight, until she met Daniel Reed. It was a chilly autumn evening in London when their paths crossed. She had been dragged to a colleague's birthday party at a wine bar near Covent Garden. Sophie, usually shy in social gatherings, had been planning her escape when Daniel walked in. Tall, with dark hair neatly swept back and eyes the color of emerald glass, Daniel had a presence that immediately drew attention. Sophie noticed him before she even realized she was staring. He smiled politely at the group, but when his eyes locked with hers across the room, it felt as if the noise around them dimmed. He made his way over, casual yet confident. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere but here," he said, his tone warm, teasing. Sophie laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same," he replied, leaning slightly closer. From that moment, conversation flowed effortlessly. Sophie found herself laughing more than she had in months, feeling seen in a way she hadn't expected. Daniel listened with genuine interest, his gaze never wandering. For Sophie, who often felt overlooked in the bustling chaos of London life, his attention was intoxicating. By the end of the evening, he offered to walk her home. The city lights shimmered on wet pavements as they strolled, their conversation drifting from careers to dreams to childhood memories. When they reached her door, Sophie hesitated, her heart thumping. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'd like to see you again," he said softly. And Sophie, caught between disbelief and exhilaration, whispered, "I'd like that too." What Sophie didn't know was that Daniel carried shadows from his past, shadows with a name, Clara Hayes. But that night, beneath the amber glow of street lamps, Sophie only felt the promise of something new, something life-changing. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and Daniel fell into a rhythm that felt almost too perfect. Weekend brunches in Notting Hill, late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn, and quiet evenings cooking together in Sophie's small flat. Daniel was attentive, affectionate, and seemed utterly devoted. He surprised her with small gestures, her favorite flowers, handwritten notes slipped into her sketchbook, and once, an impromptu trip to Brighton just because she mentioned she missed the sea. Sophie, who had long guarded her heart, felt herself opening in ways she never thought possible. Emma, her best friend, noticed the change. "You're glowing," Emma teased one afternoon as they sat in a cafe near Hyde Park. "This Daniel guy must be something special." Sophie blushed, stirring her cappuccino. "He is. It feels different. Like I can finally breathe." But Emma, ever the protective friend, tilted her head. "Just promise me you're careful." "Sometimes the ones who seem too good to be true," she didn't finish, but Sophie caught the unspoken warning. Still, Sophie pushed the doubt aside. Daniel wasn't just a fling, he was consistent, present, and serious about their future. He spoke of wanting children one day, of buying a house outside the city, of escaping the grind for something more meaningful. One night, as they lay tangled in sheets, Daniel whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Sophie's breath caught. She hadn't dared to say it aloud yet, but her heart had already known. "I love you too," she whispered back, her voice trembling. It felt like the beginning of forever. But forever, Sophie would soon discover, was more fragile than she imagined. The first crack in their perfect picture appeared on a rainy Thursday. Sophie had stopped by Daniel's flat unannounced, carrying takeaway and a bottle of red wine. She let herself in, humming softly, only to find Daniel sitting stiffly on the sofa, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. When he saw her, he forced a smile. "Sophie, hey. I didn't expect you." "Surprise," she said lightly, holding up the bag. But something in his demeanor made her pause. Later, as they ate, Daniel seemed distracted, his phone buzzing more than usual. At one point, Sophie caught a glimpse of a message flashing across the screen. A name burned in her mind, Clara. Clara. She remembered vaguely hearing the name before, mentioned once in passing when Daniel spoke of his past relationships. An ex, he had said, quickly changing the subject. That night, Sophie asked casually, "So, who's Clara?" Daniel froze for a second too long. "No one important. Just an old friend." But Sophie noticed the way his jaw tightened, the flicker in his eyes. Something about it unsettled her, though she told herself not to overthink. Daniel loved her. That was what mattered. What Sophie couldn't know was that Clara Hayes had recently returned to London after years abroad, and she wasn't the type to let go of what she once considered hers. Weeks turned into months, and despite Sophie's unease about Clara, her relationship with Daniel grew deeper. They began spending nearly every night together, and conversations about the future became more concrete. Then, one morning in late spring, Sophie stared at 2 pink lines on a test strip in her bathroom. Her hands trembled, her heart raced. Pregnant. She sat on the edge of the tub, emotions crashing over her in waves, fear, disbelief, and a surprising swell of joy. She had always wanted children, but she never expected it to happen so soon. That evening, she told Daniel. His reaction was not what she expected. "You're pregnant?" he repeated, his face pale. "Yes," Sophie whispered, searching his eyes for joy, for excitement, for anything. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "Wow. Okay. That's a lot. A lot." Sophie's voice cracked. "Daniel, this is our baby." He stopped, looked at her, and finally pulled her into his arms. "I'm just shocked, that's all. We'll figure this out." Sophie clung to those words, desperate to believe them. She told herself his hesitation was normal, that any man would need time to process. But deep inside, a seed of doubt was planted. It was only a week after Sophie shared her news that Clara appeared in Daniel's life again, not by accident, but by design. They ran into each other outside a cafe in Kensington. Clara, stunning as ever, with her golden hair cascading over a designer coat, smiled like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Daniel," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It's been ages." Daniel's stomach flipped. Memories came rushing back, their whirlwind romance, the fiery fights, the heartbreak when she left. And yet, seeing her now, it felt as if no time had passed. They sat down for coffee. Clara asked about his work, his life, his family. And then, with practiced subtlety, she leaned closer. "I made a mistake, Daniel. Leaving you was the worst decision of my life." Her words lingered long after they parted. That night, when Sophie asked why he seemed distracted, Daniel brushed it off. But Clara's voice echoed in his mind, awakening old feelings he thought he had buried. And Clara wasn't finished yet. Sophie noticed the shift almost immediately. Daniel wasn't the same man who once sent her sweet messages every morning or who kissed her forehead as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He was quieter, distracted, often retreating into his thoughts. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe the pregnancy had overwhelmed him. Maybe she hadn't reassured him enough. She tried harder, cooking his favorite meals, planning little dates, reminding him gently of the dreams they had once shared. But no matter what she did, his mind seemed to be elsewhere. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sophie glanced at it, torn between respect for his privacy and the gnawing suspicion eating at her. She told herself she wouldn't look, that she trusted him, but when the screen lit up again with the name Clara, her heart skipped a beat. The message was short, "Thinking of you. Can we meet again?" Sophie froze. Her stomach turned, and her throat tightened. She quickly placed the phone back, guilt flooding her for even reading it. But the damage was done, the seed of mistrust had sprouted. When Daniel returned, Sophie forced a smile, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, a storm brewed. She lay awake that night, one hand resting on her stomach, the other clenching the sheets. The tiny life growing inside her deserved stability, honesty. She wanted to believe Daniel would choose her, would choose them. But Clara's shadow was growing darker by the day, and Sophie feared it was only a matter of time before it swallowed them whole. The tension became unbearable. Sophie couldn't keep pretending. One Saturday morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, she turned to Daniel and said softly, "We need to talk." He looked uneasy. "About what?" "About Clara." Daniel stiffened, his green eyes narrowing. "What about her?" "I saw her name on your phone," Sophie admitted, her voice trembling. "You've been talking to her. Meeting her." Silence hung heavy in the air. Sophie's heart pounded. She prayed he would deny it, laugh it off, reassure her. Instead, Daniel sighed deeply and rubbed his temples. "Yes, I saw her," he finally confessed. "It wasn't planned. We just ran into each other." "And then what?" Sophie whispered. He hesitated. "We had coffee. We talked. That's all." Tears burned in Sophie's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew how you'd react." The word stung. Sophie wrapped her arms around her stomach protectively. "Daniel, I'm carrying your child. I need to know where your heart is. Are you with me, or are you still with her?" Daniel reached for her hand but she pulled away. His voice cracked. "I don't know." That was the moment Sophie's world shattered. While Sophie wrestled with heartbreak, Clara was weaving her web. Clara had always known how to manipulate Daniel. She remembered every detail of his vulnerabilities, his fear of abandonment, his need for validation, his hunger for passion. When she left him years ago, it wasn't because she didn't love him. It was because she wanted more. Now, seeing him with Sophie, she wanted what she had thrown away. She invited Daniel to dinner under the guise of closure. She wore his favorite perfume, the one he once said lingered on his mind for days. She laughed at his jokes, reminded him of the adventures they once shared, and painted a picture of a future where they could rekindle what they had lost. Daniel tried to resist. He told himself he loved Sophie, that she was carrying his child, that he had responsibilities now. But Clara's presence was intoxicating. The familiarity of her touch, the intensity of her gaze, it stirred emotions he thought had long since faded. Clara leaned closer across the candlelit table. "You can't tell me you don't still feel it, Daniel. We belong together." And when Daniel didn't pull away, Clara knew she had him. Sophie could sense the distance widening, but she refused to crumble. She remembered her mother's words from years ago, "Strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about finding the courage to rebuild when you do." So Sophie focused on herself and her baby. She began attending prenatal classes, connecting with other expectant mothers, and leaning on Emma for support. Emma was furious when she learned about Daniel's wavering loyalty. "That coward," Emma spat one evening as they sat in Sophie's flat. "You deserve better, sophomore. And your baby deserves a father who chooses you, not someone who plays both sides." Sophie tried to defend him, but deep down, she knew Emma was right. At her ultrasound appointment, Sophie saw her baby's tiny form flickering on the screen, the steady thump of a heartbeat filling the room. Tears streamed down her face, not from sadness, but from a fierce love she hadn't known she was capable of. She whispered to the little life inside her, "No matter what happens, I'll protect you. I'll give you everything." And in that moment, Sophie realized she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. It happened on a stormy evening in late November. Sophie had cooked dinner, hoping to rekindle some sense of normalcy. But Daniel barely touched his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. Finally, Sophie set down her fork and met his eyes. "If you're going to leave, just say it." Daniel's face drained of color. Sophie. Don't lie to me anymore, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I know you've been with her. I can feel it every time you look away from me. Daniel stood, pacing, his hands in his hair. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, Sophie, I do. But Clara, she's a part of me I can't let go of. Sophie felt her chest tighten. So what about me? About our child. His silence was the answer she dreaded. She rose slowly, one hand on her belly, her eyes brimming with pain but also with resolve. Then go, Daniel. If she's what you want, go to her. But know this, I will raise this baby with or without you. And one day, you'll regret walking away. The words hung in the air as thunder rumbled outside. Daniel stared at her, torn, but eventually turned toward the door. And just like that, Sophie's world collapsed. The night Daniel walked out, Sophie cried until she had no tears left. She curled on the sofa, clutching a pillow to her chest, the rain outside echoing her grief. Every part of her wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to promise she could make it work. But deep down, she knew the begging would only strip away the last of her dignity. Morning light crept into her flat, and Sophie forced herself up. She had to keep moving. Her baby needed her. Margaret, her mother, arrived soon after with groceries and a quiet strength only mothers seem to possess. You don't have to do this alone, love, she said firmly, pulling Sophie into a hug. Sophie broke down again, but Margaret held her, whispering, "You're stronger than you think. And one day, you'll look back and see that this wasn't the end, it was the beginning." Emma came later, determined to cheer her up with bad reality TV and takeaway curry. "He's an idiot," Emma declared between mouthfuls. "And Clara? She'll chew him up and spit him out. You'll see." Though Sophie couldn't yet believe those words, she clung to them like a lifeline. Slowly, she began rebuilding her days around routines that didn't include Daniel. Prenatal yoga, work projects, little walks in the park where she whispered to her unborn child. She wasn't healed, not even close. But for the first time since Daniel left, Sophie felt a flicker of hope. At first, Daniel thought he had made the right choice. Clara was dazzling, intoxicating, everything she had always been. Their nights were passionate, their conversations fiery. He convinced himself he was chasing happiness, that he was reclaiming what he had lost. But it didn't take long for reality to set in. Clara was demanding, jealous, and unpredictable. She mocked his work, complained about his hours, and bristled whenever Sophie's name came up. She didn't want to share him, not with anyone, not even with the child Sophie carried. One evening, Daniel came home to find Clara scrolling through his phone. "Still talking to her?" she snapped, tossing it on the table. "She's the mother of my child," Daniel argued. Clara's expression hardened. "You're with me now. She's nothing but baggage." The words struck him harder than he expected. He tried to shake them off, but when he lay in bed beside Clara, all he could see was Sophie's tearful face the night he left. The memory of her hand on her belly, her voice steady despite the heartbreak, "I will raise this baby with or without you." For the first time, Daniel wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. By the time Sophie entered her third trimester, she had found a fragile but growing sense of peace. Her belly rounded beautifully, and every kick reminded her she wasn't alone. At her baby shower, organized by Emma, the room buzzed with laughter and love. Friends gifted tiny clothes, blankets, and toys, while Sophie glowed with gratitude. For a few hours, she felt genuinely happy, surrounded by people who truly cared. Later that night, when the guests had left, Sophie sat with Emma and Margaret. "I never thought I could do this," she admitted, tears shining in her eyes. "But I'm actually excited. Scared, but excited." Emma squeezed her hand. "That's because you're already a great mom." You don't need anyone else to prove it. Sophie smiled, realizing she no longer needed Daniel's validation. Her strength didn't come from him, it came from within, from her baby, from the family and friends who stood by her. It wasn't the life she had planned, but maybe it could still be a good one. The call came in the middle of the night. Sophie's contractions had started earlier than expected. Margaret rushed her to the hospital while Emma met them there, clutching Sophie's hand as waves of pain tore through her body. Hours blurred into one another, filled with sweat, tears, and determination. Sophie screamed, pushed, and finally, with one last effort, her baby's cry filled the room. A nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms. A little girl. Sophie stared down at her daughter, overwhelmed by love so fierce it stole her breath away. "She's perfect," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. Emma leaned over, smiling through tears. "What's her name?" Sophie kissed the baby's forehead. "Lily," she whispered. "Her name is Lily." In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Daniel, not Clara, not the heartbreak. All that mattered was the warm, fragile life in her arms. Sophie knew she would give Lily everything: love, protection, a home filled with strength and joy. For the first time since her world fell apart, Sophie felt whole again. Weeks later, Sophie settled into life as a new mother. Sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant demands of caring for Lily were exhausting, but they were also fulfilling in a way she hadn't imagined. Every coo, every tiny smile reminded her why she kept going. Daniel tried reaching out. A text at first, "How's the baby?" Then a call, then finally showing up at her door, regret etched on his face. "I made a mistake, Sophie," he said, voice shaking. "Clara isn't who I thought she was. I want to be here, for you, for Lily." Sophie stared at him, memories rushing back. The love, the betrayal, the nights of tears. She looked down at Lily, peacefully sleeping in her arms. "You don't get to walk back in like nothing happened," Sophie said quietly. "I begged you to choose us, and you didn't. Lily will know her father if you truly mean to be part of her life, but as for me, Daniel, I've moved on." His eyes filled with tears, but Sophie stood firm. For the first time, she wasn't the fragile woman who needed his love. She was stronger, wiser, a mother. As Daniel left, Sophie closed the door and held Lily close. Outside, the world stretched wide and uncertain. But inside her heart, Sophie felt unshakable. She had been broken, abandoned, and betrayed, but she had also risen, stronger than ever. This wasn't the ending she had once imagined. It was better. It was hers.